This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
I watched a couple movies this week. Candyman has rocked the box office. The fourth movie, technically, in the franchise, directed by Nia DaCosta.
First black female director to have a #1 film at the box office.
Pretty incredible. So we're here to break it down because Candyman, the original film, came out nearly 30 years ago. In 1992, the Clive Barker short story is what it's based on, but it spawned a couple sequels through the 90s. Less important, but we're going to get into that, the original material, that first movie, and what that staying power was all about, and then what they've done with it now in this film, because this film is not a reboot.
They're drawing on the source.
They are, and this is an evolution, and I'm very excited with what they've done to it, so I can't wait to get into it. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Here we go. As you said, Clive Barker's The Forbidden was a short story in one of his books of blood. We covered that episode 85. Check it out if you want to know all about Clive Barker.
Check out that episode. It's lovely.
We'll get into how it's different. Some of the film...
Very different, right?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Speaking of different stuff, some of the films around this time leading up 70s, 80s, we've had a steady diet of Halloween, Friday the 13th, the slasher.
This is a slasher heyday, baby. Halloween at the back end of the 70s really kicked it off. Jason at the offset of the 80s, Freddy right there behind him, and then all of the offshoots. There were so many different derivatives of this. They're begging for this type of material, so it's no wonder this thing was spat out.
Right. But what is unique is these other films, pretty much all white casts in suburbia or rural settings. So having it be set in inner city Chicago with the primary monster slasher character being black was quite a novel thing. We spoke about in our episode on Army of the Dead about zombies, because it wasn't until 1968 that there was a black lead in a commercially successful horror film.
Wow.
Even though films had been around forever. And of course, that was Night of the Living Dead, where Ben is the main character, and that also has political, social allusions in the film. Yeah. I saw a fun relation as well was that Tony Todd, who plays Candyman always, he plays it in the new one.
Always and forever.
Yeah. he was Ben in the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, that's interesting. That's super cool.
There is a legacy of him in horror films and that representation.
Yeah, I mean, you can't understate Candyman's presence among the slasher gods, really. I mean, I love horror. I grew up in horror. My brother's a special effects makeup artist. Him and his wife do that for cinema. So I love creatures, effects, blood, gore. I grew up in that kind of stuff. So Candyman is always in the fold. This is a huge character. And for the black community, I can only imagine how big it must be for them. I mean, we're talking aligned up with mainstream players here. So this can't be understated how big this character was. It really gets to capitalize on the fever pitch slasher mania of the 80s. This comes out in 92, capitalizing on it. And man, setting it in the Chicago project, setting it in the Cabrini Green housing project, says something with it. And bam, you have somebody that is respected as Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers.
And also with the Chicago stuff, as you said, this was not in the original short story. Clive Barker is British. It was set in the slums of Liverpool, doesn't have the same salience as the Chicago projects in this time. The Candyman figure is a white, jaundiced-looking creature with long blonde hair and pale skin. He doesn't have the. It isn't the
very different, Babadook-ish, you know. We'll say it, you know. So, and I was reminded of the Babadook on a cinema level, watching the new film. So you know that and I'm being reminded of that as these things are a little bit related there.
I was looking into kind of where all of this comes from, because we say, oh, it's not set in Chicago and the monster is different. What are they pulling from, and what is actually in the short story? So here's some of those influences for the original film. The bees and the honey on his torso and all of that is in the short story. The hook hand is also there as a part of this creepy guy.
Yeah, good.
So I just wanted to bring up another crazy production note from the first film, which was, Evan already knows this, but we had a teacher, one of our professors, Bob Keane, was very much
he's responsible like for the look. It's pretty crazy actually.
On the makeup costuming department, and has done tons of special effects stuff. He taught us much about the world of professional film.
Oh yeah, he's an incredible individual. He worked on one of my films, so like to have he's worked on it. He's had a storied career. I implore you to look at IMDb for Bob Keane. He's worked on so many of the Star Wars films, Alien films, Candyman, Hellraiser. I mean, he's a crazy guy. He was one of our favorite teachers. So it's very odd and incredible that here we are talking and directly intersected. He is responsible for the look of Candyman. You go to IMDb, you'll see all about it.
And some of the other stuff, because that hook hand thing is also kind of coming from an urban legend. Candyman is now his own urban legend, but it's also pulling from other. So in the mid-1950s, this was a big deal. This kind of, there's a serial killer on the loose, and he's got a hook for a hand, and turned into, merged with the lover's lane sort of fascination, where teenagers could drive and they went down and hid in the woods, and then they're kissing, and then there's either it kills the
hook came off on the rearview mirror.
Yeah. or he's the guy.
Thank God they got out of there when they did. Who knows how close they were to certain death. Yeah, absolutely. It was welded right into it. Yeah.
Yeah. A Freudian warning about premarital canoodling or whatever it might be. But that started in the 50s. And then there's other urban legends. The Bloody Mary urban legend is the big one, because the movie has it saying his name 5 times and then he appears in the mirror.
Right.
But that is not at all part of the short story, because as we talked about in our Clive Barker one, he kind of relishes in the telling of the story. He's much more esoteric, ethereal, etc. So in the short story, it's just the nature of doubting his existence. That's what summons him. And so this is this woman who doesn't believe. And yeah. And she's not supposed to be there. She's maybe has the wrong, not quite honest means. She's researching graffiti in the short story. So that's why she's there.
I was going to ask because we'll get into how they change it and what her role is, what the protagonist's role is. But yeah, she's researching graffiti in the slums there in London.
And then she stumbles upon these things. Oh, there was a murder. Oh, there's another one. Oh, this what's going on. And
very cool.
Then Candyman is summoned by her lack of belief. But the Bloody Mary stuff, which was added to the film, there's a couple of places that could have come from in history. It's so ubiquitous. Every middle schooler sleepover.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah, that stuff. So it could have possibly come from Mary Tudor of England. She had that nickname because she was known for putting Protestants to death. She was Bloody Mary. There was another lady, Elizabeth Bathory, and this is in Hungary in the 1590s. She was called the Queen of Blood. And this was crazy to me. She is actually a serial killer noblewoman. She's the most notorious woman serial killer of all time. She was convicted for murdering hundreds of young girls. And this isn't a myth. There, hundreds of witnesses, survivors, physical evidence left behind.
Oh my God.
She was like the female Dracula in real life. The myth about her was that she bathed in their blood, but that's not substantiated. But she definitely killed hundreds of young girls in the 1590s.
Oh my God.
And then the last one is Mary Worth, who was a witch in the Salem witch trials. So perhaps that's where Bloody Mary stuff came from. But I couldn't get over that serial killer.
No. Oh my God.
Links in the show notes to all this stuff if you want to look at it more.
Our show notes are banging. Please check them out week to week.
Yeah. The thing that you mentioned about the Chicago public housing also factors in as a real life reference, because there was an actual murder in this area that has to do with the mirrors.
This was incredible. I'm so glad we finally arrived to this point, because this is the linchpin. So I saw the new Candyman, and we went back and watched the original, and understanding how this was set in this place, what this point of view was, how race intersects with it. Coming back to Cabrini Green and how this first film was centered around the Chicago projects. Cabrini Green was a notorious housing project. poor construction, high robbery rates, horrible crime.
And it was something like the sum total of all of the units had like 15,000 people living in them.
It's iconic for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
There was a murder there that went unsolved for a while, and forgive me, I don't know how that was resolved, but it was the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy.
Mm-hmm.
She was murdered and found days after her murder after an assailant had crawled in through her bathroom mirror.
God.
The way this place was constructed to cut corners, the wall between units had a hole in it for the bathroom mirror to be there on both sides. They were able to gain access through the bathroom mirror. Horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And so this story comes out in the Chicago Reader in 1987. And it is from here that the filmmakers are directly pulling what they're going to marry up with this Clive Barker story. They're pulling directly the mirror on the wall. I think that is probably where the whole mirror thing comes from, because later, as the protagonist and her partner are investigating, they go to the unit. They go through the mirror. This becomes such a thing. Later, Candyman comes at her through her own mirror. She's living in now a renovated, like totally redone, gentrified Cabrini Green place. So he attacks her through the mirror. This is woven into the DNA of the original film. They're using this real murder in this real place with these real problems at the heart of it. This only happens because a city cut corners. This is how it charges the movie, and this is how it's directly inalienable from it. This is why this movie in 1992 has staying powers, because they're talking about very real things, very scary things.
And it is subtle, but I also picked up on the fact that in the original film, the first woman who is murdered her first name is Ruthie. And then the neighbor who has the child, Anthony, who then becomes the protagonist of the new film, her name is Anne Marie McCoy. So that's Ruthie and McCoy, which was the 52-year-old
I didn't even put the
woman.
McCoy together. You're so right. Absolutely. I knew Ruthie directly. They used Ruthie, then they changed the last name. But the McCoy is there. The McCoy is the mom. That's their last name.
Yeah, so
that's incredible.
There's no denying that they have pulled from this incident.
It sounds like a horror movie, but it is absolutely real. That's real horror. It could not be playing on more thematic cliches, but it's absolutely real. And it's because of a direct socio-political problem. You can't get scarier than this.
Speaking to some of the real horror, Bernard Rose, who is the white British director of this, who got Clive Barker on and said, hey, I want to do your thing. And then he's the one who goes to Chicago, sets it in Chicago, shifted up in that way. He did not, because the short story doesn't have any backstory on the Candyman in the Liverpool slums. So he gave Tony Todd, who's the actor who plays the Candyman, free reign to flesh out the backstory, saying, go do rehearsals, come up with it, work through your character. So he came up with it all in rehearsals with Virginia Madsen, who is the white woman as the main character in the first one. Because like I said, there's no backstory.
This is art, baby.
Yeah.
This is art.
Yeah, Tony Todd kind of said he compared him to the DC Batman villain Scarecrow, or the other two literary figures, which I love, being the Hunchback and the Phantom of the Opera. These are sort of these monsters, who also use tenderness to win the love of the protagonist. And there's a tragic backstory to love, which is all featured in the first film. But I love that is all the design of the actor playing him, who then said
brought in very quickly. The backstory is he's an affluent black brought up in slavery times, and is a portrait maker, and ends up falling in love and impregnating a white woman, and he is lynched because of that. And the lynching is where they bring in the hook, and then they cover him in honey to attract a horde of bees. That's where the bees come in.
Gotcha.
So that is the backstory that they put together for this original lynching, and then the new film takes that where we are in 2021 and brings us now, and how has this happened through time? We'll get there. It's very interesting how they've kept this aligned. Like I said, it's not a reboot. They're building and evolving this. Very interesting. But back to 92.
We're almost there. I just wanted to bring up one final sort of odd influence that I saw that was referenced by Bernard Rose, the director. I don't know if you're very familiar with the biblical story of Samson. He's the super strong guy who then his hair gets cut off and then he gets weak, but when it grows back, he can destroy the temple. there's a story previous to that, which is him and Delilah, who then becomes a name synonymous with sort of sultriness and deception or whatever. Before he gets with her, he is dismayed because he's supposed to be married to this Philistine wife who is not an Israelite. On his way, he just has super strength. He rips apart a lion with his bare hands. When he, on the return trip back, this is maybe some prophetical meaning, but he sees that bees have overtaken the carcass, and he just digs his hand into the bees and eats the honey from it.
Whoa.
So this is back on his way to his wedding. He uses it as a riddle for the 30 groomsmen that he has. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And his wife spills the beans on it, so they win. And so he said he would give them all new clothes, but in a rage for being deceived, he slays 30 Philistines and gives their clothes as a prize. But his wife then is no longer his wife and goes on a rampage, kills 1,000 Philistines with a donkey jawbone, which is another facet of the Samson story. So basically just kind of like turns into this vengeful monster because of love that was not fulfilled. And it also involves bees and honey, which I thought was crazy. That's
very interesting. Yes,
it's very much involved in this
very
biblical
good
story. And that's really the focus, and you can speak to this, of the new film, where people are not quite remembering how Candyman was turned into the monster. The focus is not on the white woman figuring it out, but the black experience in the Cabrini Green Towers or after.
Right. Well, the first film centers around a white woman who is trying to get to the bottom of this Candyman myth. And through the course of the film, she meets this mother who has an infant baby. And the plot of the film ends up being that she needs to actually physically get the baby back and give it back to the community, give it back to the mother. And so that is the close of this film, is the Candyman trying to sacrifice this baby so that there will be more, more to the story. The new film picks up in present day. To put spoilers out there, the new film centers around that baby having grown up and coming to understand that he is the baby at the center of this legend here at Cabrini Green. And through this learning, he invokes Candyman. That's how they start to turn this into a generational thing, is starting to understand how Candyman has lived on through the ages, and how it's not just as we have seen him typically in the other three films. It is always Tony Todd and that iteration, that backstory. They're evolving it here, and they evolve it immediately with the opening of the film. You get a new backstory where it feels almost like a full reboot, but it's not at all.
I saw that there, like you said, it's like there's more than one.
There are many
iteration of this.
They've broken this up, and they've clearly developed several different iterations of the character, and they are bringing this to real social things. People unjustly killed by the police or lynch mobs. How this has happened through time. How that original backstory that Tony Todd created with the filmmakers for the original film is the onset of this. It's the ignition of all of this, and that from then on it's been happening, and it happens over and over again, and these people add to the hive. It's referred to in the new movie by the man who's trying to instigate a new iteration of the legend. It's referred to that Candyman is not a singular person or entity. It is the hive. It is the collective that is continuously growing bigger by adding another soul, a lost victim, a silenced victim to this hive.
Right.
Yeah, they take that and say, well, that's just the beginning, but this happens throughout time all the time. If this is all adding momentum to the legend, if they're all of these souls are being added to that energy, that's a very scary thing.
I saw a few of them are based on real life situations.
Yes.
The 14-year-old child, George Stinney Jr., who was convicted for murdering two girls in 1944, exonerated in 2014.
Wasn't he electrocuted?
He was, yeah, the youngest person.
They have a marionette puppet of this enacted during the credits, yes.
And then James Byrd Jr. in 1998 in Texas was the third one that they show. And the thing about showing them, I saw Nia DaCosta was saying they got a theater troupe. You said it's these marionette things. They do this sort of shadow puppetry,
silhouette.
Yeah, because she's very sensitive to, this isn't the horror, the grisly retelling the trauma of these things. that's not the intent. So this silhouetting imagery, I was fascinated as how she was also influenced by specifically Black female artists to get a lot of what she puts into the cinematography and whatnot. So this silhouette imagery is based on this artist Kara Walker. And like I said, it's designed to be provocative, but through a lack of gore or removing the visceral parts of the detail. So this Kara Walker, she in LA, she has her work at the Broad Museum. It's these silhouette figures kind of the South slave owning era and place. And they're very, very
I've seen them. I've
hard
seen
to
them.
look at. Yeah.
Yes, I visited at some point, I think probably 2019, and I remember this exhibit now. Now, having seen the film, I remember this exhibit very, very, very much so.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So that she's pulling from her as an info. She didn't use her for the film, but it's clearly an allusion to her work and her depiction of this past and trauma.
Very quickly, while we're on these marionette shadow puppets, not only do they tell these backstories of the Candyman, but I mean, this is how they also retell the mythos of the original film without showing any of it.
Because they're like, we don't want to just put in the footage from the old film.
They don't. There's no actual visual call back to the original film. If there is, it's told through tale, like through these marionette puppet shadow silhouettes. So that weaves it all together, and it weaves all these true stories in with the film mythos, so it all becomes one thing.
Gotcha. One of the other things that she pulls from another Black female artist is the work of Carrie Mae Weems, starting 70s into today. Big thing that she did was photographs involving a lot of mirror work or people looking into mirrors and something different being on the other side, which again, Nia uses as part of the horror tropes, as you said before, of mirrors, but also distancing of that violence in the film. The thing is happening in a mirror over here, gives it more of a distance, so it isn't about that thing specifically. I'll post links to these artworks and whatnot.
That comes through. I'm thinking about some of the center, probably the crown jewel moments of the film, the kills, if you, to put it lightly,
right.
to put it badly. There is that distance in those moments is so evident. And I'm thinking of so many of them. This is not a up close, shaky cam Rob Zombie movie. There is a distance and a study to this. It's very evident now, you saying that, the influence that had on the picture.
Yeah, so I just thought that was cool that she was
pulling
this
stillness that she invokes. That's very, very interesting. A quiet that with that distance that comes this odd settling. It's very interesting what she was able to do with those moments.
I see. One of the things I saw in terms of the production, in a bit of a poor segue, but just as far as the plans for this sequel, which then went into development hell, the original ideas was because Freddy versus Jason was such a big deal in 2003. Miramax had suggested Candyman versus Hellraiser, just to put two. Clive Barker recommended against it.
Really?
He said, that doesn't sound good. And then the other big one was Candyman versus the Leprechaun. Was another option. God. And here's a Tony Todd direct quote: "I will never be involved in something like that." So that's, in a way, it's like, oh well, it's been 30 years, but it's the ideas they had was, I mean, they did have these other sequels, but then it's good that they took it and elevated it and escalated it and utilized it and didn't just do Candyman.
Well, quickly, I'll tell everyone, I've watched the 21 film last night. I watched the original film this morning, and lo and behold, the second film also available right now. I just clicked, let's go. I'll put it on. It's evident that the Candyman thing loses all of its gusto the moment you take him out of Cabrini Green.
Right.
The second film takes place in Louisiana, and the moment I'm there, the moment I go, whoa, well, everything that made this cool is now gone. I mean, that's like taking Freddy Krueger out of his dreams, that's taking Jason off, to put him in New York. I mean, we found out that maybe that didn't work so well. So you take Jason out of Camp Crystal Lake, and there's something not right. You take You take, in above all of these, you take Candyman out of Cabrini Green, and I'm like, well, what's the point?
Right.
We're talking about specific things. You take the specificity out of it, and now he's like a Freddy Krueger knockoff.
Right.
You know, you keep in at Cabrini Green, he is a contender, baby.
And I
You
think
know?
also with the two films that we're speaking about, there is a synchronicity to their own self-awareness of the material. I think people have mixed opinions about the first one because it is centered through
Right.
this white
This is
woman's thing, but it still is also to her detriment that she is involving herself in such a
right.
brazen, careless way without having a certain
I
awareness.
watched the new film, and it was squarely, this is a black centered film. It's a black lead. This is a black artist. This is a black director. From the top down, this is a black point of view. I had to go back and watch the original because I had to see how in the world it traversed that, because that seems like a minefield where you run into just racist cliche the moment you step foot on that. That is a kamikaze mission.
Right.
That's a failed mission. And I had to see how they did it. And man, it is surprisingly self-aware. The movie is about an affluent white woman who starts to deal and meddle in things and not respect a culture the way she ought. That's what the movie is about. And it's helmed by a white director who's very aware of this. The film is what it is talking about, and it absolutely is aware of it. I thought it was very interesting. The politics of this film are very interesting. The 92 film,
right? Because as a caveat, it's like it's still set in 92. So we're saying it's aware of what it was in 92,
right?
And this 21 film is aware of itself in 2021.
We have come a long way in 30 years. I mean, I think we've come a long way in like 2.
Right?
You know, like I think, you know, and look, this iteration of Candyman was shot pre-George Floyd. For them to come from, okay, this was a white protagonist with a black antagonist. It's a slasher movie. How did they navigate? I thought for them to navigate these pit holes and actually have something to say was fantastic. Not that it's like an incredible movie, like it's like you know, the most amazing thing, but like to have not fallen in the most obvious pitfalls, man, they did an incredible job and had something to say. This is all the same people who said, well, let's put it in Chicago at Cabrini Green. They're on to something. And when you're on to something, much like, you know, this is a really stupid thing to relate it to, but like Fast and the Furious, they were on to something. They were on to what was going on in the streets of New York and LA. And they had passion about bringing that story to the screen. These filmmakers had a passion about what in the world was going on at Cabrini Green, what in the world was going on in the projects of America, what the real horrors of America really are.
And I love that the through line still goes back to the original source material, which even though it has nothing to do with that, it's still about belief in a story, keeping it true, and the judgment of people around you and the horror and trauma of things that you're not aware of. All of that is still in the 100 pages, and they used that.
The new film also is aligned with this in that it is discussing art and artists and black artists and how they're represented and how they are to use their own trauma and those things as fuel to talk about where they are and exist in their reality. And that to be linked to such violence, that's a hard thing to trope. So in the same way that the filmmakers were aligned and knew what they were doing with the first film, it is still very true for this one. But now it stands to say so much more. It is a reclaiming of that. Now it's really from a black point of view, a black voice. And it's very nice to have this so charged, so relevant.
Number 1 at the box office.
There are other things that have come out that we've done a lot of this since Get Out. We've done a lot of these types of movies and TV shows, and I haven't caught them all. I've caught a lot of them, but there's some that I've slipped by.
Yeah,
I am interested in this one is because this is a character that's been with us for 30 years, and I'm interested in how you can keep that character fresh without tearing it down. And this isn't tearing it down. This is you're evolving it, turning it into something new, and keeping it really aligned with what's going on. in the horrors of our real lives.
Yeah.
Oh man, have we done it?
I think we got it. We got. Except for the thing to look out for. Nia DaCosta is soon to be directing another movie, the Captain Marvel sequel, which will make her the youngest person to direct a Marvel film.
Oh my gosh!
So she,
really?
Not just the Candyman world, but she is also someone to look out for as an artist.
Nia is absolutely somebody we ought to be keeping our eye on. It was a I don't often, this show is not about what Evan likes. So, I was so intrigued by last night that this made the research for this week a delight. I love when we find things like this that I think most people would argue in the cinema world that the Candyman 1992 film surpasses its literary basis, that it is better because it actually stands to say a lot more.
With the backstory and everything, yeah.
So, for it to be now refreshed, brought back, baby, it's as good as it can be. It was a blast.
Beautiful.
So thank you guys for listening. Yeah. If you are reading something you're really into, at @IlliteratePod on Instagram. If you are watching something that you love, message us at @IlliteratePod on Instagram. If you know there's something coming out later this year, you know what I'm going to say, at @IlliteratePod on Instagram. Thank you guys so much. We will catch you next week.